Chapter 671, The Fourth Name Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios Strange Item. Klein instantly felt a headache, but he asked with an unperturbed expression, "What is it?" "Fish with human fingers growing in them." Without waiting for German Sparrow's reply, Frank ran into the dining hall. Before long, he ran back and held a strange bluish-black fish in his hand. The fish was of normal length. In the space where its eyes were, it had a face resembling a human. Its belly had been dissected, and 3 bloody fingers could be seen stuffed inside. It wasn't inserted by me. It was originally like that. Look at its teeth. It's very unlikely that it will eat something like that, so it can only be the case of the fingers producing themselves. Of course, I'm currently unable to determine what the fingers will do to its body. Frank hurriedly explained his judgment. Klein glanced at the fish and said after some deliberation, "It might also be stuffed inside by someone." "Makes sense. Then it's not the most unique fish." Frank was stunned for a second as he appeared somewhat disappointed. "Fingers are considered flesh and blood. I'll ask Heath. He's an expert on such matters." As he spoke, he surveyed the area and found Heath Doyle, who was huddled in a corner eating. Frank quickly went over and placed the bluish-black fish before Bloodless. Heath Doyle extended his hands and pressed his face to the fish. Upon seeing this scene, Frank had a baffling feeling that something was amiss. He soon reacted and laughed. "No, this isn't food for you. You've been eating fish all this time to the point that even your body smells of fish. What I meant was to ask if you know the fingers inside the fish's stomach. Can you find its original owner?" Heath Doyle stopped his leaning actions and carefully studied it for a few seconds. "They belong to a Rose Bishop's, at least a Rose Bishop's." He took out the 3 bloody fingers and stacked them together. After a brief moment, the fingers melted like wax, turning into a puddle of sticky flesh and blood. The flesh and blood squirmed as they drew a word in blood red: "Help." Fingers from a Rose Bishop. Help. Upon seeing this scene, Klein instantly made some connections. He recalled the Saint of Darkness and Leo Master from the dream world. This Aurora Order saint was in a particular ruin, and he was affected by the remnant powers of an angel or deity of the spectator pathway, causing him to dissociate and transform into a kind character. This resulted in him being trapped there. His good and evil side constantly fought, often clashing at the psyche level. The main persona, which was more inclined towards the darkness, gradually held the advantage as the good personality hid everywhere in the mind world in search for help. Therefore, this is an attempt by Leomaster's good side to call for help. As a saint of the Aurora Order, he might very well have advanced from a shepherd, so it's nothing strange to have the beyonder powers of a Rose Bishop. Klein nodded in thought, believing that his judgment was likely close to the truth. Help? How? Frank Lee turned his head at German Sparrow with a blank look. "You should ask your captain, not me." Klein shook his head. "You don't have to bother. There are too many oddities with these waters." The reason for giving this opinion was that, from the dream, Leomaster's main persona held the absolute advantage. To really rescue him, he needed to make preparations to deal with a demigod. Although the good side would definitely interfere with it, all it could do was lower the Saint of Darkness's strength to a certain extent. It would still remain a demigod. Of course, with Queen Mystic on board the future, to make any actual attempts wasn't impossible. But if Leomaster were so easily rescued and have him become a completely good Saint of Darkness, Klein believed that the Queen would have long done so. The reason why she didn't take action had to be because it was unrealistic. For example, the place where Leomaster is at causes one spirit to dissociate, so much so that Queen Mystic doesn't even dare challenge it. Leomaster's dream was only partially restored. It nearly made me face a situation I couldn't deal with. Finally, I resolved the problem quickly with the Sea God Scepter. If I were to meet him in the real world, I'd really suffer a dissociation in personality, becoming a member of an asylum. I would have to find a way to borrow the mental terror candle from Father Yatravsky to have a chance of being treated. Heh heh. I can also get Miss Justice to treat me, but she's still lacking in strength at the moment. Klein recalled the past as he jested inwardly. Yeah. Frank Lee trusted Gehrman Sparrow a lot. Perhaps the fellow who's asking for help is long dead. Upon saying this, his eyes suddenly lit up as he stared at Heath Doyle. Can you wipe out the mental imprint left on this flesh and blood? Yes, Heath Doyle replied succinctly. The ends of Frank Lee's mouth cracked open bit by bit as he smiled like a 200-pound child. I've always been very curious about the flesh and blood structure of a rose bishop. I've always thought of the outcome of using similar flesh and blood as the medium for crossbreeding. One day, you will die amidst your experiments. Thankfully, I'll be leaving this ship soon. Klein had the baffling impression of a bratish child entering an armory. Heath Doyle, whose face was nearly translucent from the paleness, was taken aback for 2 seconds before sincerely saying, "Thank you." "Why thank me?" Frank Lee scratched his head, looking completely puzzled. "He's probably thanking you for being able to hold back your curiosity and not using his flesh and blood as the experimental subject. You are a partner worth trusting." The corners of Klein's mouth twitched a bit in an attempt to interpret the reason. He realized that the future's first and second mate had rather strange thought processes. Afternoon town. In the half-collapsed cathedral. Colin stood by the side of the ecclesiastic in white and softly asked, "Who are the kings? What is the huge calamity? Who tempted Sasra?" The ecclesiastic didn't seem to hear him as he continued prostrating to the ground. He repeated his words of penitence as though he was an illusory recording left behind by the environment. A wraith, spectre, or an evil spirit? Derek looked in that direction, feeling somewhat nervous. Seeing no response from the ecclesiastic, Colin reached out his right hand, inching his silver sword towards the person. However, despite the sharp blade tip reaching the back of his head, the ecclesiastic remained in penitence, as though nothing had changed. Colin Iliad retracted his silver sword as he surveyed the area with dark green symbols in his eyes. Then, he walked diagonally to the altar ahead as he cast his gaze onto the candle emitting a yellow light. After a few seconds of silence, he reached out his left hand and extinguished the entirety of the candlelight. The collapsed deity statue in the middle of the altar suddenly turned dim as the prostrating white-robed man finally stopped his penitence. He slowly lifted his head. It was a gloomy green, and his gaze was filled with hatred. Before Derek, Chaim, and Joshua could react in time, the devout ecclesiastic had pounced forward with an exceedingly fast speed, drawing out an afterimage. Colin was already prepared for it. He took a step diagonally forward with his right foot, turned his body halfway, and swept backward with the silver sword in his left hand. On the sword, spots of light soared, instantly forming a gigantic storm. The storm that was formed purely out of light swept the surroundings, leaving the ecclesiastic frozen in midair before he was completely devoured. The storm quickly came to an end as Colin looked at the ecclesiastic whose body had been infused with the light of dawn. Then, he repeated his previous questions again. Who are the kings? What is the huge calamity? Who tempted Sasra? The ecclesiastic whose figure was already very indistinct replied in a dazed manner, the kings are Sasra, Ouroboros, Medici. Just as he was about to say the fourth name, a transparent flame tore through him from the inside. The flame instantly engulfed him, burning him into a spreading black gas. So the kings refer to the kings of angels. What's the fourth name? Why did he self-destruct just as he was about to say it? Is it the one who tempted Sasra, or someone else? Derek was filled with questions. As the ecclesiastic died, the streets outside and the entirety of Afternoon Town suddenly produced roars that sounded like wild beasts. Derek subconsciously looked out the window and saw a gigantic face. The glass where it was originally plastered to had grown a single unique eye. On its face was short and dense black hair. Tap. 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 Asterisk another similar monster rushed out from inside the cathedral. It had the build of an ordinary human and 2 eyes, but the surface of its body was similarly covered with short black hair that resembled a beast's. A degenerate town that has been completely corrupted, Colin sighed as he faced one of the monsters. Derek, Chaim, and Joshua also took up battle positions in a bid to fend off the remaining monster. The future continued cruising in peace before encountering a brief night once more. After Klein entered the dream world, he found himself back in his original position, by Admiral of Stars Catlia's side. He was just about to look at the shadow of the giant king's court on the opposite side of the mountain to seek out more possible clues when he suddenly heard Catlia ask heavily while hugging her knees. "Have you met her?" Klein acknowledged tersely without hiding the truth. Catlia pursed her lips and asked, "She's on the ship?" "Yes." Klein turned his head and looked at Admiral of Stars as he said in passing, "You have very deep feelings for her." Catlia's expression wasn't as lost and dazed as before. Biting her lips, she said in a self-deprecating manner, "That's right. I was by her side before I was 3. Heh heh. That's what they say, but I no longer have any actual memories of that. She taught me, and she held me by the hand as we adventured. She watched me grow up. To me, she's my captain and my teacher, as well as my mother." As Catlia spoke, she suddenly fell silent. Chapter 672, Bystander Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. Upon glancing at the silent Catlia, Klein suddenly felt a little awkward. He didn't speak again as he turned and jumped off the boulder. He walked into the black cloister through the half-open door. In the square surrounded by a gloomy tower and the buildings, there were remnant fires from a war. Gigantic arrows were embedded in the ground, with the end of their shafts softly wobbling from the wind. Frank Lee was still digging and planting something, but there wasn't food by his feet anymore, but a pool of flesh and blood. "What experiments do you plan on performing on them?" Klein, who walked past, couldn't help but ask. Frank smiled in excitement. "Plenty. For example, all I need is 1 ox that can satisfy the meat requirements of an entire ship. Every time a piece of meat is sliced off, it will regrow new flesh again." "Why is it oxen again?" Klein was momentarily unable to provide a response. All he could do was silently draw the crimson moon inwardly. Along the way, he encountered Navigator Odilov, who was reading on the ground, Nina, who was almost taking off her clothes due to her inebriation, Heath Doyle, who was hiding silently in the shadows of a corner, before arriving at the hall filled with murals. At some point in time, Anderson Hood had conjured a reclining chair and was leisurely lying on it, observing the extremely religious and holy murals on the dome. "Sigh, we're finally about to leave these cursed waters. It will just be another 2 noons and nights." Seeing Gehrman Sparrow enter, the strongest hunter sighed from the bottom of his heart. "As long as we successfully leave this area, then I'll no longer need to worry about any remnant problems." Klein originally wished to ask him to shut up, but since he was talking about himself and no one else, he couldn't be bothered. He asked in passing, "Are you from Intis?" "Barely. My father is from Intis, and my mother is from Seeger," Anderson answered, with the full intention of having a chat. Klein continued taking a few steps forward. "Then, do you believe in the eternal blazing sun, God of steam and machinery, or the God of knowledge and wisdom?" Anderson's expression suddenly turned a little odd. "My faith was originally in the God of knowledge and wisdom, but their priests are too despicable. Just because I failed my examinations, they ignored my ordinarily handsome face and treated me as a ret * road pooey. I'm just better at other topics. My intelligence is in no way lacking. My eye for aesthetics and my basic foundation in drawing has always been excellent. Heh heh, before becoming a hunter, my dream was to be an artist. Of course, after coming to the sea, my faith is more or less in the Lord of Storms." Upon hearing Anderson's description, Klein suddenly thought of a joke *, a priest from the God of knowledge and wisdom might make such a statement, he failed his examinations. This child is hopeless. Just bury him. He was about to lead the conversation into Anderson's life as a hunter, as he was the only person apart from Queen Mystic who could communicate with him normally in this dream world when he suddenly heard the sound of a door creaking open. In the depths of the Hall of Murals, there was the sound of a door opening. Anderson just mentioned about successfully leaving these waters. Klein felt an inexplicable urge to facepalm himself as he focused his gaze on the source of the sound. Following that, he saw a man in a short linen robe running out from the depths of the Hall of Murals and towards them. The man had luxuriant raven black hair, but he had wrinkles on his face, as though he had suffered plenty of hardship. Saint of Darkness Leomaster. Leomaster's good side. Klein recognized the man, and he immediately discovered a tall figure surface in the depths of the Hall of Murals. The figure was dressed in thick and heavy black full-body armor. His eyes emitted a deep redness. He held a huge sword as he chased after Leomaster. Clang! 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 His metallic boots hit the ground repeatedly, releasing clear and hurried sounds. It's the real Leomaster. The main persona of the Saint of Darkness. Klein saw the two approaching figures as he instinctively turned to the side and quickly retreated. He immediately held himself to the hall's wall before realizing that Anderson Hood had leaped up from his reclining chair at some point in time, clinging close to the other side of the wall. Sensing Gehrman Sparrow's gaze, Anderson grinned, returning a smile that meant, "So you are the same as me." "Who's the same as you?" "This isn't cowardice. If you weren't around, I would have taken out the Sea God Scepter and fought the Saint of Darkness. I've always been considering what would happen in the real world if I were to help the good Leomaster kill the main persona in the dream. Yes, there are crew members from the future outside. If Leomaster's main persona really goes mad, Queen Mystic will definitely take action. It shouldn't be a coincidence that these two fellows left their own dreams and came here. Both parties are already very close in the real world. Perhaps someone had directed the good Leomaster over. Queen Mystic. Many thoughts flashed through Klein's mind. Leomaster, who was dressed in short linen robes, saw the two men ahead. He had wanted to cry for help, but in the blink of an eye, he discovered that the two of them had escaped to the two ends of the hall, as though they didn't wish to partake in any of this. He desperately ran as he rushed out the Hall of Murals. The redness in the armored Leomaster's eyes darkened. He continued his pursuit, completely ignoring Klein and Anderson who were clinging close to the mural walls. By the time they left the hall, Klein, who had some theories in mind, didn't hesitate to take a stride forward and rush out like a hunting leopard. Anderson raised his right hand and grabbed at thin air, failing to stop Gehrman Sparrow in time. This guy was still rather rational a moment ago. Why did he suddenly go mad? He discovered something. What a strange person. Anderson looked at the square outside, hesitated a few seconds, and finally chose to follow. They chased all the way out the Black Cloister, and they arrived in the region where the Admiral of Stars was. Klein saw the linen-robed Leomaster circling around the boulder to escape his evil counterpart. Then, he took the opportunity and faced the shadow of the giant king's court on the opposite mountains, praying softly with ancient Hermes, "The Lord that created everything, you are omnipotent and omniscient." After making another circle, the good Leomaster continued chanting, "You are the source of everything great. You are the beginning and the end, you are the God of gods. You are the ruler of the vast astral world." With the honorific name spoken, the sea of clouds that separated the two mountains suddenly stirred before slowly splitting apart and revealing a deep crevice at the bottom. The shadow of the giant king's court on the opposite side suddenly sucked up the frozen dusk that was extremely distant. However, nothing happened after that. Klein seemed to figure out something as he turned his head to look at the buildings near to the Black Cloister's door. He saw that, behind a clean floor-to-ceiling window, the beautiful but distant Queen Mystic Bernadette was watching everything that was happening in silence. She was indeed the one who made the good Leomaster escape from his dream and arrive here. Since a listener from the Aurora Order was able to bring little Jack into the forsaken land of the gods, it doesn't make sense that the Saint of Darkness isn't able to do so. When there's no path ahead, and with him seeing the shadow of the giant king's court, Leomaster's split personality will definitely wish to escape into it. Hence, he demonstrated the way to enter the forsaken land of the gods to the person observing in secret. Klein retracted his gaze with great certainty. As for why Leomaster didn't succeed, he believed it was because he wasn't in the right location. He needs to be deep in those waters, and he needs to find a particular spot that is surrounded by danger and strangeness. Then, only by chanting the honorific name of the City of Silver's creator in the dream brought about by the night, will the passage that's hidden in the shadow of the giant king's court be opened. Following that, one can enter with the aid of a dream, bringing one's body and ship to transmigrate through the fog that mixes reality and illusion, so as to reach the shores of the forsaken land of the gods. Klein thought of certain possibilities. To him, the method of entering the forsaken land of the gods wasn't something he needed to care about. If he wished to do so, once he advanced to sequence 4 and truly obtained a certain level of godhood, he could get Little Sun to set up a descent or bestowment ritual for him to directly descend. However, if he used this to reverse engineer the way to leave the forsaken land of the gods, it would be extremely useful. This was priceless for the City of Silver. From the looks of it, the key to leaving the forsaken land of the gods is really in the giant king's court, but as to what it is, there's no way of guessing it. Amidst his thoughts, pea vines rapidly grew out from the soil, instantly turning the area outside the black cloister into a green forest, and it also forcefully separated the Saint of Darkness's main persona and the good persona. Then, Klein saw through the gaps of the pea vines that Katlia had stood up. She was no longer sitting there hugging her knees. Sizzle. Derek first did a roll before he jumped up, cleaving down at the giant's leg which was covered in short, black hair. Stimulated silver lightning smote down, causing the single-eyed monster to tremble as he stood rooted to the ground. Derek didn't miss this opportunity as he immediately opened up his arms. Bright and pure holy light descended and enveloped the mutated giant. In the brilliance, the monster collapsed with a tragic cry as its body produced black fog. After a series of battles, Derek discovered that the monsters produced by the strange afternoon town were all afraid of intense light despite their different traits. Such an experience had allowed him to avoid injuries, allowing his teammates to keep their lives. After a while, when Colin finished the strongest monster, Afternoon Town was restored to its silence. All the lit candlelights were already extinguished. The chief of the 6-member council surveyed the area before saying with a sigh, "Let's regroup before we set up camp." At that moment, the teams that had gathered together had already been reduced to a third. There were only 6 people. Colin Iliad's true goal was actually the giant king's court, but their encounter in Afternoon Town had made him realize that the exploration couldn't be done in haste. This was because the giant king's court might hold deep secrets about the cataclysm, with unimaginable danger. Therefore, he needed half a year or more, perhaps even 2 years of preparation and preliminary explorations before he could attempt opening it. Chapter 673, Blood Text Translator, Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios layers of pea vines that appeared as though they were capable of weaving into a stairway into heaven dropped and shrank back into the soil. Be it the Saint of Darkness's main persona or Leomaster's good side, they vanished. Only Katlia stood at the top of the boulder, surveying her surroundings with a blank look. Queen Mystic threw Leomaster's main and good side back into his own dream. Or did she pull them elsewhere in an attempt to understand the unique traits necessary for entering the forsaken land of the gods? It seems like it's impossible to pull these two personalities into different dreams, otherwise, Queen Mystic would have long conversed with the good Leomaster individually, as well as agree to help him defeat the devil in exchange for relevant information, without going through so much trouble. Of course, to truly kill off the Saint of Darkness's main persona, perhaps one will have to enter the dangerous ruins in the real world. Even Queen Mystic wouldn't dare to attempt it, as it might produce an evil queen who abides by, "do as you wish, and do as much harm." Klein turned his head once again in thought, looking at the nearby buildings around the black cloister's door. He saw that the figure belonging to Bernadette had vanished behind the clear floor-to-ceiling windows. Klein didn't attempt to seek her out to figure out if Queen Mystic had obtained more information from Leah Master's good side. This was because he remembered Gehrman Sparrow's core persona, Mr. Fool's Blessed. An Admiral of Stars knew very well that, in Mr. Fool's tarot gathering, the sun came from the City of Silver in the Forsaken Land of the Gods. To say that Mr. Fool didn't know the method of entering the Forsaken Land of the Gods was unbelievable. Therefore, as a Blessed, Gehrman Sparrow definitely lacked the motivation to delve deep into the matter. There are many matters where the case is true that a persona which brings you success will also make you fail. This is a flaw for Faceless. Klein retracted his gaze and looked back at the shadow of the giant king's court on the opposite mountain, only to realize that the frozen sunset was slowly returning to the horizon. On the same mountain, the boulder remained standing as Katlia slowly sat down again, hugging her knees. Noon and night switched thrice, but the actual amount of time that had passed in the outside world was just the daytime of a single day. The future circled around the dangerous ruins and dodged the latent dangers hidden in the safe sea routes, before finally arriving near the entrance of those waters. Klein and company once again saw the ruin which was mostly submerged with seawater from the very beginning. They saw the grey stones and columns, as well as the huge dome at the top. Previously, they could hear loud and clear panting sounds. Bloodless had even painfully pointed out that a corpse was hidden in those ruins. And that corpse was very likely to be the source of the panting. At that moment, the ruin that hid immense danger no longer brought fear to the people on board the Future, but joy. This was because it meant that they were about to leave the ridiculous and terrifying waters. At some point in time, Nina had already climbed up to the tall crow's nest and said loudly as she looked at the ruin, there's a ship. Ship. Klein circled around Anderson Hood, who was blocking him, and approached the shipboard as he focused. Indeed, on the right of the stacked stones and stone columns, there was an ordinary three-mast sailboat docked by it. As there was something in the way, it would be difficult for the people on board the Future to notice it if they weren't viewing it from a high vantage point or looking carefully. The sailboat floated there without a single sailor on board. The silence made it terrifying. It's as though it was all eaten by the ruin. Anderson came over and shook his head with a sigh. In these waters, one mustn't go close unless one knows the ruins well. A person who dares outline the mural of an angel of fate doesn't have the right to say that. Your treasure hunting team claimed to be rich in experience, but in the end, aren't you the only one left from it? Klein didn't turn his head as he lampooned. At this moment, Katlia also came to the deck as she looked at the sailboat docked by the ruin. During this entire process, she didn't give Gehrman Sparrow a glance, it was as though he didn't exist. After a brief moment of silence, Katlia raised her hand to remove the heavy glasses on her nose bridge. The deep purple hue in her eyes swirled as though she was trying to outline one complex symbol after another. A pair of eyes suddenly appeared above the empty sailboat. They were a pair of illusory, translucent dark purple eyes. The pair of eyes slowly moved and circled the deck once before entering the cabin. This Beyonder power is very useful. Speaking of which, based on the means demonstrated by Queen Mystic and Admiral of Stars, the Beyonder powers of a mystery prior has some of the highlights of fairy tales. Man, will Queen Mystic be able to turn people into frogs? Also, is the mystery prying of a mystery prior demonstrated here, on their eyes? Admiral of Stars's eyes are somewhat odd. I have to take note. Klein silently made a guess as he awaited the outcome of Katlia's remote exploration. After a while, the dark purple hue in Katlia's eyes finally dimmed. She rubbed her brows, wore her glasses again, and said to Anderson Hood and Frank Lee, "There's a problem inside." As she spoke, she took out a handful of colorful powder from her classic warlock robe, and she suddenly threw them outwards. The powder didn't scatter onto the ground and instead formed a realistic color picture. The picture's background appeared like a captain's cabin. There was a picture on the desk and a portrait on the wall, both depicting the same person. He was a man from Faisac, with broad shoulders, light blonde hair, and deep blue eyes. This. Klein first found it familiar before he recalled where he had seen the man before. Back when he was in Naz, an adventurer had been pursued by the second mate of the King of Immortality, Curtius, and ran into the Lairdal Bar to seek help from the members of the Adventurer Association. At that instant, among the powerhouses who stood up to provide protection was a muscular man from Faisac who was more than 2 meters tall. Klein had found him rather strong and placed him at sequence 6 at the very least. Why would his ship suddenly enter these waters, and why would he rashly explore a dangerous ruin? Amidst Klein's puzzlement, he carefully observed the supernatural picture on the deck. This time, he saw a pool of blood on the floor, and beside the blood were a few words in Faisac, the Fountain of Unaging. The last character had a drawn-out mark of blood before it was connected to clear smudges that extended out towards the door. Klein's mind seemed capable of restoring the actual scene. The Sequence 6 Faisac man had suffered a sudden attack and fell to the ground, heavily injured. He tried his best to write down the source of his encounter, but just as finished the first few words, he was held by the legs or head by some unknown entity, and he was forcibly pulled away. Considering how the red words weren't wiped away, Klein suspected that the entity that dragged the adventurer away wasn't a living person. It should be the corpse of that ruin, he thought, feeling a headache. The Fountain of Unaging. They came here in search of the Fountain of Unaging. Anderson had said in excitement. Clearly, but they didn't find it. Frank Lee shook his head in great disappointment. He also looked forward to the Fountain of Unaging, believing that the fountain's waters could create qualitative changes to his various experiments. The Fountain of Unaging. Slaughterer Curtius was the one chasing after the young adventurer back then. He's the second mate of the King of Immortality. Rumor has it that the King of Immortality had once drunk the waters of the Fountain of Unaging. Curtius even warned me, Gehrman Sparrow, to not interfere with the young adventurer's matters, claiming that it was the will of the King of Immortality. Klein barely reproduced the truth based on various tidbits of information. The young adventurer obtained the secret of the Fountain of Unaging from one of the King of Immortality's aides, and he was thus pursued. Later, with the protection of some of the stronger members of the Adventurer Association, he barely escaped from Slaughterer Curtius. Later, to hide from the King of Immortality and also to seek out the Fountain of Unaging, they finally chose to adventure into these waters. Who knew that they ended up being wiped out in that ruin? Could it be that the Fountain of Unaging is hidden deep in that ruin? Klein looked at the stacked gray stones and stone columns as he vaguely made a prediction. As he temporarily had no way to verify his theory, nor did he know whose corpse was buried there, he didn't have the urge to explore or take risks. He rationally retracted his gaze. I can ask will a Septon or a Rhodes. Perhaps the Fountain of Unaging is the pus produced from that rotting corpse. Klein guessed with the most nefarious of thoughts. At this moment, Katlia, who heard Anderson's and Frank's conversation, thought and said, if their death was caused by their search for the Fountain of Unaging, I do not believe that the owner of the portrait and picture would have the motivation to leave behind accurate information before his death. After all, the people who actually find him here wouldn't be his family. Makes sense. If I were in his shoes, and if I encounter a monster in my treasure-seeking adventures, I wouldn't think of providing any hints to others before my death. Klein indiscernibly shook his head, failing to think of any reason for the time being. Cadlia looked at Anderson and Frank, who wore looks of anticipation. A successful adventure is a result of having detailed intel and sufficient preparation, but we lack all of that now. Her voice suddenly turned loud as it resounded in every corner of the ship. Continue sailing. Leave these waters. Aye, Captain. Nina, who was on the crow's nest, gulped a mouthful of beer. A few minutes later, the descent and ascent that violated common sense happened once again, but the prepared members on the future were no longer in a sorry state like before. They easily overcame the stimulating scene of jumping over the ravine and being sent flying. Soon, the future landed over blue seas, and a distance away was a gigantic storm blotting out the sky. Not far away, there was another ship floating there silently. It was 200 meters long, its front and back curved up, making it look like a crescent. Upon seeing the flag depicting the black tombstone, Klein's mind flashed with the corresponding name, the Death Announcer. It was the flagship of the King of Immortality Agalito. At this moment, Klein no longer felt fear and horror, but excitement and agitation. With Queen Mystic on board, and with no need to hide this time. She, together with me, Admiral of Stars, Anderson Hood, and the crew of the future will have the chance of wiping out the crew of the King of Immortality. Food for creeping hunger has been found. I found a candidate for a marionette. At this moment, the Death Announcer suddenly turned around, moving away at an unprecedented speed. It fled. Klein instantly wore a blank look. Soon, the Death Announcer had vanished from his line of sight. That was way too fast. I just had the thought. Klein looked at the undulating surface of the sea, temporarily unable to gather his thoughts. Amidst his thoughts, he came up with a theory. King of Immortality Agalito's second mate, Slaughterer Curtius, is suspected to be a devil or even a desire apostle. He possesses the beyonder powers to detect danger ahead of time and the ability to lock onto the source of the danger. Then, would the King of Immortality be a Sequence 4 demigod of the devil pathway to begin with? That's why once the crew of the future possessed the actual strength to deal harm to him with an actual plan in mind, he immediately sensed the problem and discovered the existence of Queen Mystic, so he didn't hesitate to retreat. Yes, this means Queen Mystic also had the intention of taking action. Otherwise, my thoughts would have only made King of Immortality sneer and retaliate crazily. Sigh, this beyonder power of the devil pathway is just too useful. Trying to ensnare the King of Immortality or his first mate, second mate, or third mate is quite impossible. Klein thought regretfully as he looked at Anderson Hood. The strongest hunter still showed a clear, warped expression, as though reeling in despair that his bad luck hadn't decreased. He was also surprised that the Death Announcer would flee with its tail between its legs, as though it wasn't going according to the script in his mind. He darted his eyes as he looked around with a guess, seemingly coming to a conclusion. Unfortunately, Anderson's bad luck isn't strong enough. Otherwise, he can be sacrificed in order to bait the King of Immortality. Heh, isn't that the correct usage of a provoker? Klein turned into the corridor and returned to his room. Just as he pushed open the wooden door, he saw a familiar back standing before his window. She had a very proportionate figure and was dressed slightly oddly. She was none other than Queen Mystic, Bernadette. "Ma'am, did your father not teach you? You shouldn't enter someone's room without permission, especially the room of a male stranger. As a lady who was brought up in a noble family, you should have been waiting by the door and earnestly request permission to enter. Emperor, didn't you recall the books on education?" Klein silently lampooned as he closed the door in passing. Without waiting for him to say a word, Bernadette said to him with her back facing him, "The matters from before have verified a theory of mine." "What theory?" Klein repressed his curiosity as he asked with a deadpan expression. Bernadette didn't turn her head as she looked out at the calm sea surface. "Agalito's fountain of unaging is a scam. If there really is a fountain of unaging, it would have been one of the main ingredients of a demoness of unaging, or it would be something that would be produced from their corpses. Therefore, any man who claims to have drank from the fountain of unaging is lying." She didn't explain what a demoness of unaging was, seemingly certain that Gehrman Sparrow knew what it was. And even if he didn't know, he would have the means of figuring it out later. Fountain of unaging. Demoness of unaging. It does match. So, the bloody text on that sailboat beside the ruin is to tell the world that the Fountain of Unaging is a scam? King of Immortality Agalito has released news of the Fountain of Unaging again and again in order to lure adventurers and pirates to enter dangerous waters and die, or to take the opportunity to slaughter them. It has strong vibes of a devil. It's no wonder Slaughterer Curtius warned me not to interfere. Klein thought for a few seconds and deliberately said in a ruminative tone, "Scam." Queen Mystic Bernadette nodded and said with a gentle tone, "This might be part of the ritual that Agalito needs for his advancement to Sequence 4. It might also be an action needed to digest the Sequence 4 potion." She paused as though making a silent sigh. Then, she said, "That's because the Sequence 4 of his pathway is demon." Demon? Sounds deceitful. Creating a treasure scam to harm others, that does match the style of a demon. Klein was instantly enlightened. At this moment, Queen Mystic turned around as she cast her gaze through her checkered black veil and towards Gairman Sparrow's eyes. "It's my turn to provide information." Klein deliberated for 2 seconds. According to the analysis of limited diary entries, Emperor Roselle suffered an extreme predicament in his later years. This forced him to come up with the idea of attempting something crazy. In this aspect, he was extremely frank. This was because the diary entries he had received up to date didn't reveal what Emperor Roselle wished to do in his later years, what predicament he was in, or what crazy action he did. Therefore, by providing this piece of information, he was hinting to Bernadette that to know the truth, she had to hand over the diary entries of Emperor Roselle's critical period to Admiral of Stars Catlia. Bernadette remained silent for a few seconds. As the dark clouds moved through the sky, allowing the sunlight to shine from the outside, the queen that reigned over the 5 seas suddenly dissociated like bubbles, shattering and disappearing. The light refracted from the bubbles had produced different colors, filling the room with a fairy tale-like dreamscape. If not for the hidden sage, the mystery prior pathway is really interesting. Klein reflected as he tapped his left thumb on the first segment of his index finger twice. He activated his vision of spirit body threads, but he didn't discover any additional black threads. This meant that Bernadette had already left. Phew. Klein silently sighed and quickly deactivated the vision. Just as he was about to lie in bed to take a rest, he heard brisk footsteps approach. Knock. 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 Someone knocked at his door. Who is it? Klein sat up. It's me. Catlia's voice sounded. Klein went over, feeling puzzled as he opened the door. He didn't ask what it was about as he coldly looked at her, his gaze expressing everything. Catlia nudged the heavy glasses on her nose bridge and said, "Coming out from those waters doesn't bring us back to where we entered. We are less than 100 nautical miles away from Toscarter Island. It will take about 3 days to Nas. Where do you wish to return to? The entrance and exit are different." Klein was surprised as he asked in a confirming manner, "Then, is it possible to enter those waters from this place?" "No, we will directly fall into that bottomless ravine of the ocean. According to the results of divination, the people who did so are dead in the true sense of the word," Catlia explained simply. "Is that so?" Klein thought before saying, "To Toscarter Island." The reason why he didn't choose Nas was because they were close to the next tarot gathering. He didn't wish to do something that took plenty of time on the future. Furthermore, Toscarter Island was the easternmost colony of the Lone Kingdom. The currency used was pence, soli, and gold pounds. Klein no longer needed to consider the problem of foreign exchange. All right. Catlia had no views on this. Watching her turn and walk to the captain's cabin, Klein shook his head slightly and sighed inwardly. If you had come earlier, you would have met Queen Mystic. In the evening, the future arrived at the port of Toscarter Island as it forcefully docked there. Klein dressed up as a gentleman, carried his leather suitcase, and came to the deck. He then handed over the final payment placed in his 2 pockets to Admiral of Stars Catlia. After subtracting the pugilist beyonder characteristics worth £700, it was a total of £1,300. As such, Klein's wealth was reduced to £8,436 and 5 gold coins. Catlia received it in silence and opened her mouth as though she wanted to say something, but she ultimately didn't say a word. Are you getting off here, or are you going somewhere else? She turned to look at Anderson Hood. Realizing that Gehrman Sparrow was about to leave and that he was on a pirate ship with him hunting several pirates in the past, Anderson immediately smiled. I'll get off here. You can now make payment. Cadlia didn't spare him just because Anderson had borrowed clothes from the pirates. All right. Anderson didn't hide his heart-aching expression as he reached out and pulled off an ordinary button in the middle of his shirt. Reluctantly, he handed it over. This is what I acquired from those waters. It's from the corpse that originated from an explorer from the lone military. I'm not sure of its original name, and I can only call it by its corresponding sequence 6 due to the powers it exhibits. Yes, Judge. Its negative effects aren't especially strong. It makes its wearer easily offend people or monsters. Perhaps, one might end up being targeted by a demigod. This isn't something you can call not especially strong. If I were Admiral of Stars, I would have chosen that sword of yours. Klein lampooned as he watched Cadlia receive Anderson's payment for the boat ride. He didn't bother with their affairs as he lifted his suitcase and left the future, arriving at the pier of Toscarter Island. Bang! Anderson Hood leaped off the deck and landed beside him. Let's get some drinks. To celebrate our departure from those cursed waters. The hunter invited him with excitement in a relaxed manner. Klein swept his glance at him, refusing his offer with his eyes. All he wanted was to put a distance between him and this fellow who had bad luck and a provocative halo. All right. Anderson looked to his sides, cleared his throat, and said, Can you lend me money? As you know, everything that I had has sunken in those waters. Having said that, he laughed. Don't worry. I'll return what I owe tomorrow morning. There are plenty of pirates in Toscarter's bars and brothels. I plan on getting them to sponsor me a little. Extort those without bounties while cashing out those with bounties. Klein sked inwardly and handed him a 5 soldi note. That little? Anderson said with his mouth agape. It's enough for your drinks, meals, and hotel, Klein calmly replied. Besides, this is £1 in cash. £1? Anderson rubbed his eyes and said with a helpless smile. All right, it's £1. I'll return £1 to you tomorrow morning. Chapter 675, Building Ties Translator, Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios afraid that Gehrman Sparrow would go back on his word, Anderson grabbed the 5 soldi note as scenes of ordinary beef sizzling over flames and alcohol beverages without any additional sedatives surfaced in his mind. Well, this fellow actually accepted it. I was just saying it in passing in order to accentuate my persona, as well as to let him understand that it isn't so easy to borrow money from me so as to prevent him from hunting pirates and returning to the Fog Sea after borrowing a huge sum of money. Klein mumbled inwardly. To him, a Sequence 5 hunter wouldn't starve or have nowhere to stay when placed in a place with plenty of pirates, even if he didn't have a single penny. He indiscernibly shook his head and was about to leave the dock when he suddenly heard a boorish shout, Gehrman. Upon hearing Frank Lee's voice, Klein shuddered as he turned around, his nerves taut. The first mate of the future, the poison expert with a £7,000 bounty, stood by the shipboard and held his hands to his mouth. As though broadcasting his voice, he asked, Where will you be most of the time? Where should I write letters to? I wish to share with you the latest results of my research. I don't wish to know. This fellow probably doesn't have many friends. And I dare to be one of the many people he thinks of as friends but doesn't treat him as one. Yes, Admiral of Stars is still inclined towards Queen Mystic, and she lacks belonging to the Tarot Club. To openly develop a snitch at her side, no, a source of intelligence. It helps in my shock and awe tactic towards her, and it's a kind of Gehrman Sparrow level punishment imposed on her. With this as a bedrock, it would be reasonable and natural for Mr. Fool to punish her. Klein's thoughts raced as he took out a notepad and fountain pen used for divinations from his pocket. He scribbled down the summoning ritual needed to summon his messenger, and he didn't forget to include the additional requirement of a gold coin. With a whoosh, Klein flicked his wrist, sending the note flying at Frank Lee like a dart, landing accurately in his hand. Excellent. Frank Lee glanced at the information on the piece of paper and waved his hand in delight. Klein didn't delay any further as he picked up his leather suitcase, left the dock, and began searching for a hotel. During this process, he was originally very adamant about objecting to Anderson's request to stay in the same hotel, but on second thought, he agreed to it. He was afraid that this fellow who was plagued with bad luck would get into trouble again, bringing about a disaster to the innocent guests and attendant. Therefore, he decided to monitor him up close and decisively handle the problem if required. After checking in, Anderson went into his room with his key. Bang! He sat down on a reclining chair as though a heavy burden was released. After leaving those dangerous waters, he finally felt like he was human again. He didn't need to worry about suddenly dying. After he laid there silently for a while, Anderson Hood slowly got up. He took out a flask that had an outer lining made of iron, flipped over a glass cup, and poured himself some hot water. He believed that he should recollect himself and begin visiting the bars. After drinking some alcohol and filling his stomach, he could seek out some sponsors. After the hot water cooled a little, Anderson raised his cup and gulped it down comfortably. Suddenly, he coughed intensely as his face turned a little purple. Cough. 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 Anderson reached for his throat, but he didn't seem capable of taking a single breath. With a crashing sound, the glass cup fell to the floor from his hand, shattering across the ground. Cough. 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 Anderson's coughing weakened as his face turned purple. At that moment, his eyes seemed to produce a spark as the veins on the back of his hands squirmed like they were alive. Bang! Anderson fell to the ground, convulsing a little before becoming motionless. His breathing even seemed to come to a halt. Seconds later, the corpse-like Anderson suddenly got up as he rubbed his face in fear. Damn it, I almost choked to death from drinking water. If that really happened, then I might be the hunter with the most laughable cause of death. Thankfully, I bought this item at great cost before entering those waters. It finally came in handy today. As he spoke, Anderson took out a doll formed of straw, from a secret pocket in his vest. Ink was used to simply draw 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth. The doll's surface had already been corroded as pitch-black liquid dripped down, drop after drop. In about 8 seconds, it was completely reduced to a liquid, turning into a stain on the floor. My bad luck hasn't decreased at all, and it has even gotten worse. Man, Gehrman Sparrow once told me of a prophecy, saying that the most lethal danger often lies in day-to-day life. Anderson paced about as he carefully avoided the glass fragments at his feet, afraid that it would cause him another death. No, I need to save myself. I need to save myself. Anderson pulled open the door and carefully walked out. He came straight to Klein's room, reached out his finger, and rapped on the door. Soon, the wooden door, which was neither too solid or hard, opened without a sound. Gehrman Sparrow, who had only taken off his coat, appeared before Anderson. Anderson forced a smile and said, "Are you pleasantly surprised?" Creak. The door closed right in front of him. He was first stunned before he muttered to himself with a stiff expression, "I should change the way I talk." Thump. 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 He knocked on Klein's door again. The door quickly opened as a revolver was pointed at him. I just wanted to ask if you know any beyonders who can improve my luck." Anderson raised his hands midway, wildly hinting for Gehrman Sparrow to provide him with the details of the powerhouse that informed him of the prophecy. Too late. I've no idea where Queen Mystic is. She didn't leave me a way to contact her. But since my messenger's summoning ritual is known to Frank Lee, it also means Admiral of Stars knows of it. And that means Bernadette knows of it. Also, after returning to Backlund, I can seek out Miss Sharon's help. Queen Mystic is in her circles, even though the frequency of her appearance isn't high. Klein gave Anderson Hood a look of pity. He wasn't fond of this strongest hunter, often mocking him inwardly and expressing all kinds of nefarious thoughts towards him. After all, Anderson was partially responsible for him losing his cufflink. However, it was only limited to his thoughts. He had no intentions of actually putting it into practice. If Anderson truly sought his help, he similarly wouldn't reject him. Klein thought for a moment before saying, "I can help you ask, and I'll give you the answer tomorrow morning. But I suspect you don't have the means to pay me. I'll go make my rounds at the bars later. Furthermore, I have plenty of stashes in the Fog Sea," Anderson replied without hesitation. Klein nodded, and as he closed the door, he said, "Meet you tomorrow morning. I hope you can survive until then." Creak. The door was locked once again. "Is that a curse, or was he wishing me luck?" Anderson whispered with a wry smile. "According to my experience, there probably wouldn't be any accidents in the next 2 to 3 days." Inside the room, Klein returned to his desk. On it was a letter that already had the introduction written, as well as an unfolded paper crane. In regards to Anderson's problem, Klein had already thought of a target to ask before he even agreed. There was no doubt that to resolve the means of a snake of fate, questioning another snake of fate was the best solution. He pondered over the space that was available after unfolding the paper crane and the questions he would like to ask before writing a draft in his mind. Finally, he raised his pencil and wrote, "How should the bad luck curse from an Angel of Fate mural be removed? What's the name of the sequence 4 potion for the seer pathway? Where can the formula and main ingredients be obtained?" Putting down the pencil, Klein carefully scrutinized the questions before carefully folding the paper crane according to the folds and placing it in his wallet. After doing all of this, he continued writing to Mr. Azik. In the letter, Klein first mentioned that he received the help of Admiral of Stars in entering the dangerous easternmost front of the Sonia Sea, successfully completed the ritual, and, changing gears, he mentioned his encounter with Admiral Hell Ludwell's inexplicable attack mid-journey and how he nearly suffered terrible losses. While on this topic, he began describing the ring on Admiral Hell's hand, which was suspected to be a relic from ancient death. He asked very subtly if Mr. Azik had any recollection of it, or if he needed to obtain it to study it, so as to invoke more memories. After mentioning this, Klein mentioned in a casual manner about the artificial death project by the numinous episcopate, as well as asking this big shot if it was feasible, or if there were any records that recorded the actual details. Finally, he mentioned how he didn't know the subsequent sequences of his pathway, and he didn't know how to obtain those opportunities. Klein began providing a description of the summary of things to take note of from traveling through those dangerous waters. This was to provide Mr. Azik information so as to prevent him from suddenly wishing to seek out the remnant aura of ancient death, without realizing the lurking dangers. Rumor has it that those waters are filled with the ravings of the true Creator. The higher the sequence, the clearer one will hear it, making it easier to be influenced and resulting in madness or a loss of control. This is demarcated by sequence 4. But a small number of demigods have found the means to act freely there. Klein wrote at the end of his letter. After folding the paper, he picked up Azik's copper whistle and summoned the huge skeleton messenger. The messenger burrowed out from the ground and politely looked at Klein from a level height before opening his palm. "Not bad." Klein praised silently and handed the letter over. Then, he brushed his teeth and took a bath before comfortably getting into bed. After an unknown period of time, he found himself awake in a dream, and he saw the desolate plains and pitch-black steeple. Familiarly walking into the depths of the steeple, Klein discovered Will Osepton's reply among the scattered tarot cards. Friendly reminder, the paper crane is about to tear. The bad luck curse brought about by the mural can be resolved by Ricardo. High-sequence formulas for the seer pathway can only be obtained from the Crazy Zeradal or the Hornacis mountain range. If you are the blessed of the Evernight, treat it as though I didn't say it. Sequence 4 of the seer pathway is Arcane Sorcerer. Chapter 676, Tripartite Transaction Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios Bizarro Sorcerer. Klein suddenly woke up from his dream as he opened his eyes to see the dark night. It's not noon yet. It's still very dangerous, he mumbled before returning back to sleep. At this moment, he finally recalled that he had already left those dangerous waters. He wouldn't vanish or go missing if he wasn't sleeping at the end of the night. Phew, it's this kind of stable environment that's good. I have to say that mysteriously vanishing due to not sleeping after dark is something that can be used to scare kids, making them not dare to sleep late. Heh, I was often scared by such stories when I was young. Klein sat up, walked to the desk, and poured himself a cup of water. After a moment of silence, he gulped down a mouthful of water as he gradually recovered his ability to think. Zeradol really went mad. What exactly did he encounter, or what happened to him? Bizarro Sorcerer. Sequence 4 is called Bizarro Sorcerer. The seer pathway's main focus is on being tricky, crafty, pranky, and paranormal. Or should it directly be summarized as being bizarre? Yes, clown, magician, faceless, and marionettist do give me such a feeling. Seer appears to be an exception, but in the eyes of others, the style of a charlatan might appear rather strange and terrifying at times. That's why Zeradol said that fate isn't the main domain of this pathway. Also, it's clear that beyonders of this pathway are more inclined to being spellcasters. According to Wuxia explanation, there are 3 methods to obtaining the potion formula to Bizarro Sorcerer. 1. Seek out the secret order and find the mad Zeradol. 2. Head to the main peak of the Hornaces mountain range and find the treasures left behind by the Antigonus family. 3. Obtain it from the church. For example, that Antigonus family's notebook might contain the corresponding formula. But each one of these 3 options is more dangerous than the other. According to Emperor Rosel's description, Zeradol was a Sequence 2 miracle invoker a long time ago, a true angel. Later, he even advanced to Sequence 1. He's equal or slightly weaker than a king of angels. The crazy him might have gone mad, but it's likely that he will be more difficult to deal with. At the very least, there's no possibility of me convincing or tricking him. Even in terms of pure strength, I wouldn't be Zeradol's match even if I employed Mr. Azek's help. Unless I wait for Wuxia to be born, but if he were to involve himself in this matter, there's a small chance of him incurring the attention of Angel of Fate Ouroboros. As for the treasure on the main peak of the Hornaces mountain range, the resounding ravings, the setup of the Antigonus family, and the rumors of the nation of the Evernight buried in the depths of mystery, they make me feel that it isn't a simple matter. I suspect it's likely to be a trap. I don't even need to consider the Church of the Goddess. Ignoring the fact that the Holy Cathedral has angels presiding over it, as well as a bunch of Grade 0 sealed artifacts, just the Backlund diocese where the Antigonus family's notebook is has a terrifying demigod. Klein couldn't help but recall Mr. A who had been erased like a pencil drawing. And the one that executed all of that was likely to be one of the upper echelons of the Church of the Evernight Goddess. A beautiful lady whose eyes lacked spirituality. She even smiled at me. I've no idea what it means. Klein shook his head in resignation, believing that he only had one course of action that he had at present. That was to find a demigod from the secret order who was still considered normal. Compared to the mad Zeradol, I can communicate with them at least, or even deal with them. Just Klein alone was impossible, but he could seek Mr. Azek's help or Queen Mystic Bernadette's help at a certain price. I can only consider this for now. Klein rapidly turned his thoughts back on how to help Anderson who'd rid the bad luck curse. It's been more than 2 months. I wonder if Fate Counselor Ricardo has left Oravi Island. Sigh, he hasn't summoned my messenger all this time to inform me of clues to the mystical item I seek. However, it's not a big problem. Bellman Carnot definitely hasn't left his post. I can contact Counselor Ricardo through him. That's good too. The Life School of Thought hasn't completed the request up to now, meaning that they haven't made their final payment. They can pay it off by changing Anderson's luck for the better, then I can receive the payment from Anderson. Heh, when it comes to a mystical item or sealed artifact which possesses immense offensive powers, isn't Anderson's sword one? According to the traits showcased by Reaper, I can ignore the item formed after he dies. I'm not some greedy demon either. I'll definitely pay additional fees to tide him over. Klein wiped away his mischievous thoughts and took out the paper crane from his wallet. After unfolding it, he carefully erased the pencil marks on it. It's really about to tear. I can use it another 2 times at best. He muttered sadly. Then, he folded the paper crane and returned to his bed to continue sleeping. As for using the radio transceiver to contact Rhodes, he planned on doing so after leaving this pirate's playground. After daybreak, Klein languidly got up and slowly washed up, believing that this was how life should be. Thump. 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 The knocking on the door interrupted his state of wistfulness. Without his acumen for danger, his spiritual intuition told him that it was Anderson Hood. As expected of the strongest hunter. He successfully survived up to now. Klein sked and controlled his expressions before opening the door. Anderson was wearing a deer hunting cap of unknown origin. He grinned as he handed him a lone gold coin. What I owe you from yesterday. Klein received the gold coin and measured its weight in his hand. There's an answer to your problem. Anderson's eyes lit up. What's the solution? Don't tell me that the answer is that there are no solutions. Am I such a person? I'll just say that it's hopeless, so just wait for your death. Goodbye. Klein lampooned as he swept Anderson with an indifferent gaze. A demigod that's good at changing one's luck stays in Orovie Island. He owes me a favor. Excellent. Anderson didn't hide his joy. So, what sort of payment must I make? Very sensible of you. Klein deliberately fell silent for 2 seconds before saying, I need a mystical item with powerful offensive abilities. Do you have any clues? If the value exceeds that of the luck enhancement ritual, I will pay the difference. Anderson frowned bit by bit before easing them. He said with a smile, I have a mystical item that matches your request. It has a beyonder power that can deal lethal damage. The negative effects aren't bad either. You will still be able to eat and sleep while having some bad luck, easily attracting monsters and enemies. Occasionally, you will be talkative and be a little off-putting. It's a joke. To be frank, my death brachydont is the mystical item you need, but it's the only weapon I have left. I do have one relevant clue. It's a rather special revolver. The bullets it shoots have the effects of weakness attack, lethal attack, and a slaughtering effect. Furthermore, it can be matched with bullets of different characteristics. The negative effects include developing a weakness that originally didn't exist after every use, such as the fear of light, the fear of ships, the fear of dogs, etc. And such a weakness will last for 6 hours. There's almost no negative effects when having it on you. It just makes you easily thirsty. This is something completely tolerable. If not for the characteristics of the revolver overlapping with my abilities and the mystical items I have, then I would have bought it back then. The seller is offering it for £9,000. So, the total price would be £1,500 and the clues to the revolver. How about that? Sounds very suitable. Besides, it fits my combat habits. Klein didn't directly agree as he asked in return, £1,500. I found more than 10 pirates yesterday. They were all very kind, contributing all their wallets to me. Otherwise, they would lend me their characteristics and heads. In just one night, I received £1,600. Seriously, I love this pirate's paradise. Anderson said with a beaming smile. I have to keep £100 for myself for the ship tickets to return to the Fog Sea. So all I can do is pay you £1,500. Earning £1,600 a night. Not only are there many pirates in Tosgarter, but they are either worth a lot or have plenty of money. Klein suddenly had thoughts about staying a few more nights in the port city. But considering how the easily cacheable and locatable targets had mostly been finished off by Anderson, what was left was definitely not easy. He felt depressed again as he coldly asked, "Aren't you afraid of being a target of revenge for doing something like that in a pirate's playground? What's there to worry about? I'm not afraid, even if they're subordinates of a pirate admiral." "Heh heh, I believe you're the same. If they're men of the Four Kings, that's not a big problem either. We're about to leave, and the propagation of information takes time. By the time they come, I'd have changed ships and identities several times." Anderson said without much concern. "Why are you cursing yourself again?" Klein silently swept him a look of pity. "Deal. Ha, here's £300. You'll have to wait for the remaining £1,200. That's when the bounty rewards and characteristic money arrive. Don't worry, it will definitely come today. It's not a lot." Anderson took out a thick wallet filled with plenty of solely bills and handed them to Klein. In consideration of his persona, Klein only did a simple count before stuffing the cash into his wallet and pockets. He said without emotion, "Buy 2 tickets to Oroville for tomorrow." He didn't deliberately exhort Anderson to buy them with a different identity, as he believed that the hunter across him was mature and experienced. If he's lacking in experience and strength, with the way he does things, he would have long been buried in some sea. Klein couldn't help but lampoon inwardly. "All right." Anderson pointed at the floor. "Breakfast together?" "My treat." Klein nodded without refusing him. Once they arrived downstairs, the two sat at a table near the window. Midway, a waiter brought white porcelain cups and teaspoons over. Just as they interacted, the waiter's gaze suddenly turned adrift. He picked up the teaspoon and stabbed it at Anderson's throat without any warning. Although Anderson was surprised, his reaction was in no way slow. He immediately leaned backward and dodged the sudden strike. Bang! Not far away, the hotel's boss suddenly shot at Anderson's dodging body. What am I doing?" After the gunshot, the boss muttered with a look of alarm and blankness. Chapter 677, Falling to the Ground. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Amidst the gunshot, Anderson's body suddenly collapsed to the floor, using an amusing manner to dodge the bullet. As for Klein, who didn't fully understand the situation, he jumped to the side and activated his spirit vision while pulling out his revolver. At that instant, his first reaction was that Anderson had gone overboard in his hunting last night and was now the target of revenge. He only wished to shout, "I don't know him. It has nothing to do with me." At the table beside Anderson Hood, a stout man dressed in a shirt with rolled-up sleeves threw forks and knife, and he suddenly drew an already loaded double-barreled hunting rifle, aimed at the ground, and pulled the trigger from a commanding height. These series of actions were nearly simultaneous with the hotel's boss, but they were simply one step slower due to the many steps involved. Bang! The scattershot sprayed out countless tiny shrapnel, riddling the ground with holes. Although Anderson had dodged in time and avoided most of the blast, he was still struck by a portion of the shrapnel as his sides were immediately left mangled. Just as Klein was about to kill the stout man with the double-barreled hunting rifle to help Anderson Hood get out of danger, he realized that the man suddenly turned blank, just like the hotel's boss. He was then filled with alarm and horror as though he had jolted out of his stupor. That's not right. They're not the true assailants. Klein rationally stopped attempting to pull the trigger. He quickly swept his gaze across the restaurant. Discovering nothing with his spirit vision, he tapped his left thumb on the first segment of his index finger twice, activating his spirit body thread's vision. At this moment, all the ladies and gentlemen in the restaurant had stood up in a fluster due to the sudden shootout. All of them were rushing for the exit. When passing by the tumbling Anderson, an elegantly dressed lady with pretty good looks suddenly paused. She released the dark-colored glass bottle she held in her hand and poured it at the strongest hunter. Sizzle! Anything that was splashed by the liquid rapidly turned black as it suffered intense corrosion. Anderson covered his face and leaped up, dodging this attack once again. Immediately following that, a gentle and cute lady, a gentleman with newspapers, a red-vested waiter, and a 5-year-old child whose hands were stained with sweets attacked Anderson Hood in all kinds of manners. Flour, lit matchsticks, fruit knives, boiling coffee, and concentrated alcohol beverages inundated him as almost everyone in the hotel's restaurant seemed to have one goal: kill Anderson Hood. In this abnormally dangerous situation without any beyonder powers involved, Anderson, who had been surrounded with no way to escape, employed an array of actions, leaping up, sending tables flying, igniting items ahead of time, barely managing to avoid suffering damage to any vital spot, and didn't suffer any serious damage. Meanwhile, Klein also noticed something abnormal. In a corner of the restaurant which was blocked by a decorative cabinet, there was clearly thin, illusory black spirit body threads extending from it, but it was silent over there. In this chaotic and panic-stricken restaurant, it appeared especially abnormal. The true assailant who planned the passers-by murder case is sitting over there. From the confusion, puzzlement, horror, and fluster that the hotel's boss, waiters, and guests exhibited after attacking Anderson, they didn't become marionettes. This is another kind of control. An illusion, an emotion seed of a desire apostle, or could it be an influence on one's psyche? Klein suddenly had an idea light up in his mind. He immediately took 2 steps forward and sent a customer who still had butter on the corner of his lips flying, opening up a pathway for Anderson Hood. The strongest hunter immediately somersaulted out of the encirclement via the path that was opened up, and he ran up to the hotel's 2nd floor. Then, with his back to the wall on the corner of the staircase, he gasped for air. Has my provocative powers reached this level? Even the ordinary residents that I don't know wished to kill me and have actually rose to arms. Man! Just as he spoke, Anderson pulled his right rib and nearly cried out in pain. No, no, no. The real circumstance is that a person plagued with bad luck shouldn't do things like hunt pirates. The reason why Klein had abandoned approaching the target to attempt to control them with spirit body threads was because he had thought of a possibility. The passers-by were implanted with psychological cues or had suffered manipulation on the psyche level. Only then would they attack Anderson in an orderly fashion. This didn't match the beyonder powers of a desire apostle, as the attacks by the manipulated passers-by were targeted and precise, without showing any observed signs of preparation. And Klein had formerly heard of the name of the potion formula of a sequence 4, manipulator. In addition, according to the psychiatrist released from creeping hunger, Klein always suspected that Toscarter Island had a mission or figure related to the psychology alchemists. In addition to the psychological cue and the control on the left side of the mind, it was rather similar to that of the spectator pathway. Klein had long believed that a manipulator very likely belonged to the spectator or dragon pathway, thus, making the outline of the matter relatively clear. The psychology alchemists really does have an important base in Toscarter Island. They also sent a sequence 4 demigod go watch over it. This demigod influences certain pirates and makes them unknowingly do his bidding, but these pirates had unfortunately ended up as Anderson Hood's sponsors last night. Hence, their true investor came knocking. Keeping his expressions in check, Klein looked at Anderson and indifferently said to him, "It's likely that one or several of the pirates from last night is involved with a hidden demigod on this island. Do you think something like that can be done by a mid-sequence beyonder? I can't be that unlucky, right?" Anderson's voice grew softer before it turned into a mutter. "Indeed, those people were controlled and are innocent. Thankfully, I didn't attack back, or I would become the main suspect of a shocking murder case and be given a bounty. When that happens, I'll be in trouble and could only become a pirate." The corners of Klein's mouth twitched slightly. If the ones being controlled had been pirates with beyonder powers, or mandated punishers, or priests of the Church of Storms, how would it develop? I would already be dead. Anderson threw up his hands as he said in realization, "You mean he doesn't want me dead and only wants to give me a warning?" Klein nodded in a serious manner and said, "So, you still have a chance." Chapter 677, Falling to the Ground. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Amidst the gunshot, Anderson's body suddenly collapsed to the floor, using an amusing manner to dodge the bullet. As for Klein, who didn't fully understand the situation, he jumped to the side and activated his spirit vision while pulling out his revolver. At that instant, his first reaction was that Anderson had gone overboard in his hunting last night and was now the target of revenge. He only wished to shout, "I don't know him. It has nothing to do with me." At the table beside Anderson Hood, a stout man dressed in a shirt with rolled-up sleeves threw forks and knife, and he suddenly drew an already loaded double-barreled hunting rifle, aimed at the ground, and pulled the trigger from a commanding height. These series of actions were nearly simultaneous with the hotel's boss, but they were simply one step slower due to the many steps involved. Bang! The scattershot sprayed out countless tiny shrapnel, riddling the ground with holes. Although Anderson had dodged in time and avoided most of the blast, he was still struck by a portion of the shrapnel as his sides were immediately left mangled. Just as Klein was about to kill the stout man with the double-barreled hunting rifle to help Anderson Hood get out of danger, he realized that the man suddenly turned blank, just like the hotel's boss. He was then filled with alarm and horror as though he had jolted out of his stupor. That's not right. They're not the true assailants. Klein rationally stopped attempting to pull the trigger. He quickly swept his gaze across the restaurant. Discovering nothing with his spirit vision, he tapped his left thumb on the first segment of his index finger twice, activating his spirit body thread's vision. At this moment, all the ladies and gentlemen in the restaurant had stood up in a fluster due to the sudden shootout. All of them were rushing for the exit. When passing by the tumbling Anderson, an elegantly dressed lady with pretty good looks suddenly paused. She released the dark-colored glass bottle she held in her hand and poured it at the strongest hunter. Sizzle! Anything that was splashed by the liquid rapidly turned black as it suffered intense corrosion. Anderson covered his face and leaped up, dodging this attack once again. Immediately following that, a gentle and cute lady, a gentleman with newspapers, a red-vested waiter, and a 5-year-old child whose hands were stained with sweets attacked Anderson Hood in all kinds of manners. Flour, lit matchsticks, fruit knives, boiling coffee, and concentrated alcohol beverages inundated him as almost everyone in the hotel's restaurant seemed to have one goal: kill Anderson Hood. In this abnormally dangerous situation without any beyonder powers involved, Anderson, who had been surrounded with no way to escape, employed an array of actions, leaping up, sending tables flying, igniting items ahead of time, barely managing to avoid suffering damage to any vital spot, and didn't suffer any serious damage. Meanwhile, Klein also noticed something abnormal. In a corner of the restaurant which was blocked by a decorative cabinet, there was clearly thin, illusory black spirit body threads extending from it, but it was silent over there. In this chaotic and panic-stricken restaurant, it appeared especially abnormal. The true assailant who planned the passers-by murder case is sitting over there. From the confusion, puzzlement, horror, and fluster that the hotel's boss, waiters, and guests exhibited after attacking Anderson, they didn't become marionettes. This is another kind of control. An illusion, an emotion seed of a desire apostle, or could it be an influence on one's psyche? Klein suddenly had an idea light up in his mind. He immediately took 2 steps forward and sent a customer who still had butter on the corner of his lips flying, opening up a pathway for Anderson Hood. The strongest hunter immediately somersaulted out of the encirclement via the path that was opened up, and he ran up to the hotel's 2nd floor. Then, with his back to the wall on the corner of the staircase, he gasped for air. Has my provocative powers reached this level? Even the ordinary residents that I don't know wished to kill me and have actually rose to arms. Man! Just as he spoke, Anderson pulled his right rib and nearly cried out in pain. No, no, no. The real circumstance is that a person plagued with bad luck shouldn't do things like hunt pirates. The reason why Klein had abandoned approaching the target to attempt to control them with spirit body threads was because he had thought of a possibility. The passers-by were implanted with psychological cues or had suffered manipulation on the psyche level. Only then would they attack Anderson in an orderly fashion. This didn't match the beyonder powers of a desire apostle, as the attacks by the manipulated passers-by were targeted and precise, without showing any observed signs of preparation. And Klein had formerly heard of the name of the potion formula of a sequence 4, manipulator. In addition, according to the psychiatrist released from creeping hunger, Klein always suspected that Toscarter Island had a mission or figure related to the psychology alchemists. In addition to the psychological cue and the control on the left side of the mind, it was rather similar to that of the spectator pathway. Klein had long believed that a manipulator very likely belonged to the spectator or dragon pathway, thus, making the outline of the matter relatively clear. The psychology alchemists really does have an important base in Toscarter Island. They also sent a sequence 4 demigod go watch over it. This demigod influences certain pirates and makes them unknowingly do his bidding, but these pirates had unfortunately ended up as Anderson Hood's sponsors last night. Hence, their true investor came knocking. Keeping his expressions in check, Klein looked at Anderson and indifferently said to him, "It's likely that one or several of the pirates from last night is involved with a hidden demigod on this island. Do you think something like that can be done by a mid-sequence beyonder? I can't be that unlucky, right?" Anderson's voice grew softer before it turned into a mutter. "Indeed, those people were controlled and are innocent. Thankfully, I didn't attack back, or I would become the main suspect of a shocking murder case and be given a bounty. When that happens, I'll be in trouble and could only become a pirate." The corners of Klein's mouth twitched slightly. If the ones being controlled had been pirates with beyonder powers, or mandated punishers, or priests of the Church of Storms, how would it develop? I would already be dead. Anderson threw up his hands as he said in realization, "You mean he doesn't want me dead and only wants to give me a warning?" Klein nodded in a serious manner and said, "So, you still have a chance." Chapter 678, Punishment Translator, Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios. On the two sides of the ancient modeled bronze table, blurry figures extended outward from the embrace of deep red beams of light before turning corporeal. The surroundings remained as silent and empty as always, as though no living creature had ever set foot there for millions of years. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool." Audrey's brisk and cheerful voice soon resounded through the resplendent palace held up by stone columns. Klein nodded his head with a smile, watching as the other members expressed their greetings under Miss Justice's lead. Here, there was no doubt that the hermit Catlia appeared rather reticent. Audrey's read on her was that she had many things on her mind. After the voices came to a stop and the members had taken their seats, the fool Klein swept Miss Justice a glance, making the psychiatrist instantly understand his intentions, hence, she didn't raise her hand slightly and speak out. Following that, he looked at Catlia and chuckled indifferently. "Tell Bernadette that she can use certain items in exchange for some answers." Bernadette. After hearing this familiar name, which was neither Queen Mystic, the owner of Dawn, nor the leader of the element Dawn, Catlia realized that Mr. Fool already knew everything. Her cheap tricks were laid bare in front of him. This made her heart sink as she couldn't help but feel an intense sense of fear. She was temporarily at a loss in regard to the attitude or words that she needed to show in response. To her, Mr. Fool's words were clear. Pass on the message, but only that one message, nothing else. She wasn't allowed to provide any other hints. Catlia believed she knew what he meant between the lines. Bernadette? That's a common name for Intis females. Who could it be? What is the answer she wishes to exchange for? What relationship does she have with Ma'am Hermit? Ma'am Hermit had privately made a request, and Mr. Fool's answer is yes. No, that's not it. Definitely not it. If it's a private and reasonable request, Ma'am Hermit wouldn't have mentioned it specially in front of us. He would have directly replied to her prayers. He is giving a warning. Audrey forgot to observe the other members as a series of questions flashed through her mind. Following that, with her acumen from the spectator pathway, she grasped Mr. Fool's true intentions. Following that, she had a particular theory. Ma'am Hermit had privately hinted about our tarot club to this Ma'am Bernadette because she hopes to acquire some answers. Mr. Fool is very displeased regarding this matter, so he pointed it out directly and gave this first-time offender a warning. Seriously, why would you divulge matters of the gathering to others? I haven't even told Susie. This will bring danger to everyone. Thankfully, Mr. Fool is around. Audrey nearly puffed up her cheeks, forgetting her image and etiquette. For the first time, she realized that not every tarot club member had a sense of belonging like she did, showing such reverence and faith in Mr. Fool. The hanged man Alger, the magician Furs, and the moon Emlyn also had similar questions and theories, but their focus wasn't the same. As Alger anticipated what Mr. Fool would do, he began to wonder who this Bernadette, a commonly seen female intist name, represented. He was curious as to why the reserved hermit would risk divulging some information on the tarot club. While Furs was worried if the existence of the tarot club would be exposed, she also instantly imagined a spy and double spy story. Emlyn watched in schadenfreude, believing the hermit to be truly foolish. Even our sanguine's ancestor treats Mr. Fool equally and had sent me as an envoy to be nurtured. You aren't even a demigod, but you attempted to try pulling off cheap tricks under Mr. Fool's watch. Do you have a death wish? Indeed, I can't understand the thoughts of short-lived creatures. Emperor Roselle once said that bugs that can only live in summer have no way of truly knowing what snow looks like. Emlyn sat back in a relaxed manner as he didn't hide the shaking of his head. The son Derek didn't have many thoughts on the matter, all he felt was that the mood wasn't right. Out of curiosity and puzzlement, he asked, Mr. Fool, who's Bernadette? Well asked. I thought Miss Justice would be the one asking. Yes, she seems a little angry, which is why she doesn't wish to speak. Klein silently commended him as he casually answered, Roselle's eldest daughter, owner of the Dawn, the leader of the element Dawn. He mentioned all of Bernadette's identities, making her appear without any secrets before all the tarot club members. And the reason why he had used owner of the Dawn in place of Queen Mystic was that Klein didn't believe that the Fool should address Bernadette as a queen. The owner of the Dawn. Queen Mystic. She's actually Emperor Roselle's eldest daughter. The Hermit, I can confirm that you are Admiral of Stars Catlia. So the rumors of you having a falling out with Queen Mystic are fake. Alger felt excited. He felt that the restriction and pressure he had endured for the past 3 months had vanished at once. This made his staid self mock the hermit inwardly. Emperor Roselle once said that those who play with fire will ultimately burn themselves. And you, Admiral of Stars, dared to challenge a god's clairvoyance. At that moment, Alger was rather thankful that although he had attempted to pull off some cheap tricks and attempted to figure out Mr. Fool's identity, goals, and present state, he hadn't involved any outsiders. He hadn't divulged any information, so he hadn't suffered any punishment. As he had introduced the 4 kings and the 7 pirate admirals, Audrey and company just needed to recall in order to confirm that Bernadette was Queen Mystic, a demigod that reigned supreme over the 5 seas. They were also surprised that Emperor Roselle's eldest daughter would still be alive and had become an important figure that was known throughout the world. The answers that Queen Mystic wishes to obtain are hidden inside Roselle's diary. Combining everything that had happened and the words that were said, Audrey vaguely guessed Bernadette's goal, believing that the Emperor's daughter wished to figure out the truth behind her father's assassination. At this moment, Catlia had already regained her ability to think. She turned her body to face the end of the long bronze table and said without any hopes that she could be let off, yes, I committed some mistakes. I will not defend myself. It was indeed wrong. Mr. Fool, no matter how much you punish me or even kill me, I'll accept it. Hypocrite. If Mr. Fool really wishes to punish you, do you think you have any means of resistance? Mr. Hanged Man scoffed on the opposite side of the table. He could identify the problem with such a simple sentence. Ma'am Hermit is still a little afraid. Audrey could notice the hidden fear from the minute actions and words Katlia had used. To her, people who deliberately emphasized their willingness to be executed were often afraid of dying right there and then. Furs found her peace from the fool's calm attitude, believing that there weren't any leaks about the tarot club, or that the leaks weren't anything important. Hence, like Emlyn, she waited curiously and expectantly for the punishment Mr. Fool would mete out. Derek remained clueless about what had happened, uncertain why Ma'am Hermit would suddenly request to be punished. At that moment, seeing Mr. Fool's brief moment of silence, Katlia resisted her unease and lifted her head slightly, observing the existence behind the thick grey fog without a trace, in an attempt to figure out his true intentions so as to give a better response. She didn't wish to make another mistake again and provoke him, making the situation irredeemable. The dark purple hue in her black eyes produced a sense of mystery as her eyes penetrated through the grey fog and saw the fool. Suddenly, Katlia's eyes heated up as illusory blood bled from them. A sinister, terrifying, and depraved language and an indescribable roar sounded in her ears. It instantly filled her senses with extreme pain as her body began to convulse and tremble uncontrollably. Her face, hands, and the areas that weren't concealed by her clothing had quickly cracked open, revealing her flesh and blood. Inside, black worms and white moths squirmed before forming all kinds of indescribable eyes. Katlia's cries and painful grunts resounded above the grey fog, causing Alger, Emlyn, Furs, and company to exchange looks as though they could sense the pain she was suffering. Meanwhile, the blurry figure turned rather clear, allowing them to see the hermit's mutation. The disgusting and nasty scene frightened Audrey enough for her to look away. She straightened her back and looked straight ahead without daring to move. Although the others didn't have such an exaggerated response, they also shared the same behavior. The true creator's ravings are indeed useful. Klein, who was shrouded in the thick grey fog, reflected from the bottom of his heart. The reason why he hadn't immediately replied to Katlia's request for punishment, was because he wanted to confirm if there was anything special about her eyes, whether they could see beyond what he allowed. For this, he had stirred some of the mysterious space's powers to be hidden in the grey fog that shrouded him ahead of time. It was to connect anyone who used a Beyonder power to see through the obstacle to Tinder. This was equivalent to the owner of the Beyonder power directly observing an item corrupted by the true creator at a psyche level. Hence, with Klein not using the grey fog to deliberately suppress the influence, Katlia naturally heard the true creator's ravings. Her organ, which used the Beyonder power, was first severely damaged before she was imbued with extreme pain, causing her mutation. If Admiral of Stars hadn't tried observing him, then the plan Klein had prepared was to get her to apologize to every Tarot Club member, and also to allow them to discuss a method of punishment in a democratic manner. And regardless of how democratic it was, the major punishment would ultimately be to stir some of the mysterious space's powers to connect Katlia to Tinder. After waiting 2 seconds, Klein knew it was enough. He gently lowered his palms, allowing the grey fog to silently repress the true creator's ravings and revert Katlia's mutation. Admiral of Stars trembled as she calmed down at a discernible pace. The cracks in her skin gradually closed as her thoughts returned to her, allowing her to take in her surroundings once again. At this moment, Alger said in a deep voice, as though he was warning himself, "Do not pry into the mystery of God." Chapter 679, Murder Request Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios, Do not pry into the mystery of God. Alger's whispers soon disappeared, but it continued resounding in everyone's ears, making them realize a reality. Although Mr. Fool often didn't put on any airs and seldom spoke, nearly answering every request they had, making them find him warm, he was ultimately a god whose mysteries shouldn't be pried into. He was a god that transcended reality. Audrey, Emlyn, and the other Tarot Club members instinctively accepted Mr. Hanged Man's altered saying, pretending that they had forgotten the original wording to be, "Do not look directly at God," because they had looked at Mr. Fool from time to time, asking him questions or seeking his advice, and with regards to that, Mr. Fool didn't seem to mind. Of course, we weren't looking at him directly due to the thick grey fog's obstruction. From Ma'am Hermit's outcome, Mr. Fool had done so for our own good. Audrey slowly exhaled. At this moment, the Fool Klein was thinking, Mr. Hanged Man is working very well in concert. I was prepared to control the world to say something similar to complete the final step of the punishment. He originally felt that getting the fake world to say something like, do not lie to God, or, do not pry into the mystery of God, would make it somewhat embarrassing. In the future, if people were to learn that the so-called blessed or the so-called world was actually a smurf of the Fool, he would be too embarrassed to face anyone. But later, on second thought, the world had done similar deeds in the past, so he wasn't short of one more. Besides, all he needed to do was to not let anyone know, right? Having overcome his mental barrier, Klein had planned on acting according to his rehearsals, but to his surprise, reality went better than he had expected. The Hanged Man seemed to be shocked to the bone as a result of the hermit's punishment. As such, he helped him say the sentence, do not pry into the mystery of God, making the effects even more natural and perfect. Yes. The problem of Ma'am Hermit's leak of information regarding the Tarot Club was only briefly tapped on by the Fool. He had given a warning via the insinuation behind his words, but she later suffered from prying into the mystery of a god. It wasn't truly the Fool's intentions. This is the outcome I wished for the most. This can effectively uphold the Fool's image. After all, a god wouldn't be petty with mortals, as it would only tarnish his reputation. However, the way Ma'am Hermit does things is way too bold. I just realized and confirmed today that she has pried into the mysteries of the Fool more than once. Although it wasn't for any vile motives, it's also something worth punishing her for. My previous reactions must have made her believe that I had acquiesced her observations, so she made it a habit. In the end, she ended up falling headfirst into my expectations. In addition, without fully grasping Mr. Fool's attitude, she directly gave hints to outsiders. Her boldness is obviously extraordinary. This means to show that she hasn't suffered enough in the past. Today's lesson should be enough to drill it into her for a very long period of time. Thinking back to her state in her dream, all of this seems pretty much the expected outcome. Sparing the rod spoils the child. I also managed to put Mr. Hanged Man, as well as the other members in check today. As a result, Klein silently muttered to himself in amusement, surveyed the area, and said calmly, that shall be all. Upon hearing that, the hermit Katlia, whose spirit body had just recovered, felt relieved. She felt intense fatigue and joy surge through her body. All she wanted was a reclining chair for her to rest for a while. The first time is a warning, but the second time wouldn't be a nice outcome. This pirate admiral sighed silently, warning herself not to try her cheap tricks any further or believe that her hints could fool Mr. Fool. She was also not to attempt to pry into his secrets. The pain she received was in no way weaker than the torment of having knowledge injected into her by the hidden sage. Therefore, she believed without a doubt that Mr. Fool was essentially a god, a true god, an unfathomable god whose mysteries couldn't be pried into. Thankfully, Her Majesty now knows where she can exchange the answers she has been desperately looking for all this while. I don't need to hint to her or tip her off in the future. Katlia turned her body to the side again, trembling as she looked at the end of the long bronze table. This time, she only dared to look at the end of the table or the armrest. The dark purple hue in her eyes had also turned faint. Amidst silence, with sincerity, she said, I'll remember your leniency in sparing me. In the grey fog, the Fool Klein nodded gently without repeating his previous words. After a moment of waiting, the magician Furs straightened her back, looked around, and spoke before Justice Audrey. Everyone, is anyone interested in an assassination mission? The target is an important member of a cult. Grateful for the favors her teacher, Dorian Gray, had given her, Furs had been recently hoping to do something for him. After some consideration, she placed her sights on the Aurora Order Oracle who had dealt immense damage to her teacher's family, Louis Veen, who could be a scribe or traveler. She didn't let Lamino's travels get to her head to the point of believing that she could kill an experienced Sequence 6 or Sequence 5 Beyonder who was good at escaping. The reason why she had such considerations was that she believed that the secret organization known as the Tarot Club, which was backing her, would provide her with unimaginable support. Ma'am Hermit and Mr. World both appear to have the means to fight Louis Veen. With any of them taking action, and with me using Lamino's travels to help, it's not impossible for us to succeed. Furs began formulating the most ideal situation. Of course, she knew that her current savings weren't enough to kill a powerful Beyonder like Louis Veen. After all, with her £830, she probably couldn't even buy a single hand of his. She knew very well that back then, Miss Audrey Hall had spent more than £10,000 to kill an Intis ambassador, a Sequence 6 conspirer. The cost of assassinating Louis Veen, who was of a similar sequence or even higher, was obvious. Furs planned on agreeing to a series of requests that the executor of the mission would have, helping the executor complete matters they found inconvenient to do themselves, in order to pay off the cost of the mission. She believed that after obtaining Lamino's travels, she was equipped with the abilities to complete certain difficult tasks. After hearing Miss Magician's request, the Hermit Catlia, the Hanged Man Alger, and Justice Audrey cast their gazes onto the world. They believed that this gentleman, one who had a unique penchant for hunting Beyonders, possessed the necessary strength. I'm not in Backlund. However, I can't respond that way. Otherwise, it would expose the possibility that Mr. Fool only has 2 to 3 blessed to Mr. Hanged Man and Ma'am Hermit. Klein controlled the world, overcoming his emotions as he hoarsely laughed. Where? Which cult? What's his sequence? What unique powers does he have? Mr. World is a little different from before. I can't explain it clearly, but it feels like he's suddenly in a better mood. Perhaps, he has really encountered something worth being happy about. Audrey suddenly noticed the difference as she excitedly imagined what could have recently happened to Mr. World. Furs happily replied, he's an oracle from the Aurora Order. He's in Backlund, formerly a Sequence 6, but he might be a Sequence 5 now, but I can't be sure. He can record the Beyonder powers that others have used and can use them once. He's good at escaping any form of entrapment, and it's difficult to surround him. Perhaps, he might be able to travel through the spirit world. The target is an oracle from the Aurora Order, a Sequence 6 or 5, with powers seemingly from the apprentice pathway. Indeed, Miss Magician doesn't appear as simple and ordinary as she seems. My original judgment was right. Catlia quickly returned to her usual state. She wasn't surprised that the magician would actually dare conspire against a particular gentleman from the Aurora Order. As for which oracle he was, she wasn't sure because the only ones she knew were Mr. Z and Ma'am D. Meanwhile, Klein also quickly evaluated the situation. An oracle from the Aurora Order, that makes it impossible for him to be innocent. Rather, he's a madman who destroys lives. Killing him doesn't make me feel guilty. It's not like I haven't offended the Aurora Order more than once or twice. Sequence 6 or 5, that's something I can handle. I've seen something that matches the trait of recording and releasing Beyonder powers as described by Miss Magician. Mr. A had used it before, but it might not really be it. To me, it doesn't matter if he's good at escaping and traveling through the spirit world. As long as I'm close to the oracle and successfully control his spirit body threads, there will be no way for him to run. It's hard to tell what will happen in a direct clash. I do have quite a solid chance of success if I sneak an attack in. Of course, succeeding at a sneak attack is a whole other matter. After some serious consideration, the world looked at the magician Furs. I can consider taking on the job, but not anytime soon. It will, at the least, be 2 months later. He wasn't sure what other accidents he would encounter at sea, so he had been rather relaxed on the time period. 2 months later. Furs repeated the time, appearing to be in a deep dilemma. It was too long, besides, she wasn't sure how long Louis Veen would stay in Backlund. At this moment, Alger, who had been watching from the side, deliberated and interjected, "Miss Magician, do you need to kill that Aurora Order Oracle personally?" "No, as you can see, I'm considering requesting Mr. World for help," Furs replied with a smile. Alger nodded as though in thought. "The premise of killing someone is to be able to find the Oracle. Can you find him?" "No, but I'll investigate," Furs answered frankly. "Why don't you get the world to do it after your investigations bear fruit?" The Hanged Man pressed. "Yes, but I haven't decided." Furs was somewhat confused, unaware of the reasons as to why Mr. Hanged Man was asking her all these questions. Alger sneered. "If you can confirm the location of the Aurora Order Oracle's location, then why spend large amounts of money to hire someone to kill him? Wouldn't reporting him directly to the churches be enough? After the Great Smog, no church is willing to let go of any related clues. He wasn't trying to make the world lose any business. Instead, he had clearly read the dilemma inside her, believing that there was a higher possibility of her not going through with the request. After all, too many incidents might happen in 2 months. Therefore, he gave some suggestions to ensure that this matter reached some preliminary agreement. Report him to the churches? This sounds familiar. Klein was surprised, never expecting Mr. Hanged Man to say something like that. Heh, while everyone is being infected by Mr. Hanged Man, he too has been influenced by us. Klein immediately felt relieved and rather pleased. Report. Furs was momentarily stunned. After a few seconds, she whispered, "That's possible." The Hanged Man smiled upon hearing that. "You can do it this way. First, investigate your target and seek out his whereabouts. If you obtain anything in 2 months, then you can hand the matter over to the church. If the matter exceeds 2 months, and when Mr. World is free, then he can provide you the help needed. What do you think of that?" Furs seriously considered it and said, "Okay. When the time comes, I'll discuss the price with Mr. World." Chapter 680, New Thoughts Translator, Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios. After receiving the world's consenting nod and confirming the matter regarding Louis Veen, Furs thought for a moment and continued, "Everyone, does anyone have a meteorite crystal or the crystallized blood of a Lavo squid, or any information about them?" These were the main ingredients of the astrologer potion formula. Furs originally planned on continuing her requests, hoping that Mr. Moon, who was also in Backlund, could help her find Louis Veen, but after some consideration, she decided to first do it herself. Only after confirming that there aren't any solutions or clues would she then request the Tarot Club for help. Meteorite crystal. Lavo's squid's crystallized blood. Sounds familiar. Isn't this because I know the seer potion formula? Yes, it's familiar because the seer potion formula's main ingredients is 50 grams of star crystal and 10 milliliters of Lavo's squid blood. The main ingredients of astrologer are like the upgraded versions of a seer. Indeed, the apprentice and seer pathway can be interchanged in the future. With this in mind, Klein suddenly had an idea. Since the potion formula of Bizarro Sorcerer is difficult to obtain, with the 3 options being extremely dangerous, should I consider the other sequence 4 options in the neighboring pathways? Such as apprentice. Once he had this idea, he brightened up as he felt that most of his predicament had vanished. And for the sequence 4 potion formula of apprentice, the Tarot Club has clues to it. It's the Abraham family behind the magician. With this in mind, the world looked at Miss Magician with a subconscious gentleness to his gaze. It left Furs shuddering, suspecting whether Mr. World had already formulated a plan to hunt Louis Veen. At this moment, the fool Klein recalled another problem. According to Dunn's and Daly's theories, the first 5 sequences of the seer pathway didn't present any obvious progression. Each of them presented a beyonder power of one aspect. Then, at the critical point of sequence 4, the 5 of them would converge and clench like a fist, presenting a qualitative change. Back when Captain and Ma'am Daly made this theory, they only knew bits of information regarding seer, clown, and magician. I'm only able to verify this idea for the subsequent faceless and marionettist by myself. So, could it be that seer, apprentice, and the possible marauder pathways cannot be interchanged at sequence 4, but at sequence 3? Klein slowly felt his joy dwindle again. He knew too little and was temporarily unable to make a judgment. All he could do was await Mr. Azek's reply and wait to leave the waters which were watched by the true creator before contacting Erodes. As Klein was thinking, he suddenly heard Katlia say, "I have the crystallized blood of a Lavos squid. It will cost 600 pounds. As for meteorite crystal, I know where to get it from." "How many grams do you need?" 600 pounds, a very reasonable price. Furs replied in a pleasant surprise, 60 grams, all right, I'll give them to you within 2 weeks. It will also cost 600 pounds, Katlia said clearly and succinctly. It's resolved just like that. Today's Ma'am Hermit is really proactive with the desire to participate. Yes, she had just been. Furs quickly nodded. That wouldn't be an issue. I have 830 pounds in savings. That's enough for me to buy the crystallized blood of a Lavos squid. But in 2 weeks, I still need to save up nearly 400 pounds. The royalties after the new year will be paid soon. It's about 150 pounds, making me lack 220 pounds. I have to think of ways to earn money again. Furs quickly calculated her financial situation. Seeing how Miss Magician took only a minute to gather the main ingredients for her potion, Justice Audrey couldn't hold back either. She raised her hand slightly and said, "I wish to obtain the complete pituitary gland of an adolescent mine dragon, but if that's not possible, 60 milliliters of a black hunting giant lizard spinal fluid and 1 fruit of an illusory chime tree." This was the main ingredient of the hypnotist potion. If she obtained the complete pituitary gland of the adolescent mine dragon, then there was no need for any other corresponding ingredients. Just as Audrey said that, she heard Ma'am Hermit reply. "Since the 5th epoch, mine dragons have nearly gone extinct and are hard to find. I have the means of obtaining the spinal fluid of a black hunting giant lizard, but it will also take 2 to 3 weeks. The price ranges from 1,500 to 2,000 pounds, as I'm not the one who decides it. I can help you keep a lookout for the fruit of an illusory chime tree, but I cannot guarantee anything." What great efficiency. After Ma'am Hermit was punished, her sense of belonging towards the Tarot Club has appeared to increase. She's more active and amiable. Audrey was momentarily speechless. After a few seconds of silence, she bowed slightly and said, "No problem." Alger, who had been watching by the side, suddenly felt that the development wasn't going as he expected. Having been punished by Mr. Fool, the hermit changed her style of being mostly an observer. She began to involve herself in every matter that she could involve herself in during the tarot gathering. And with the strength, background, resources, and channels of a pirate admiral, she immediately produced intense and blinding light. This blinded Alger so much that he could hardly open his eyes. He had a strong feeling that he was at risk. At that moment, he wished for Ma'am Hermit to return to her former state. Klein also felt surprised by what he heard and saw. "I thought Ma'am Hermit would be silent for some time, feeling an aversion to the Tarot Club for some time, but in the end. Is she the type that needs to be beaten in order to be obedient? Yes. Sparing the rod spoils the child. Queen Mystic must have spared the rod too much. Heh, the way Queen Mystic does things isn't much to speak of either. The Emperor has also spared the rod." As he lampooned, Klein controlled the world, making him survey the area before chuckling. "Does anyone of you have the potion formula of the Seer Pathways Sequence 4, or have any clues regarding it?" Sequence 4. Mr. World is beginning to advance towards the realm of a demigod. Audrey was surprised. She originally imagined that she was advancing sufficiently fast, and she felt a little proud about that. But now, she suddenly realized that she was falling behind. Mr. World has instantly become really lofty. Furs was similarly surprised. Although she felt that the silent, reserved, an unsocial Mr. World was a powerful beyonder, she believed that he was still very far from a demigod, from a sequence 4. But to her surprise, he was already seeking to purchase the sequence 4 potion formula. As expected of Mr. Fool's Blessed. Alger sighed. Likewise, Emlyn and Derek shook their heads, expressing that they had never heard of the name of the pathway's sequence 4. Klein, who believed that he could obtain clues from the City of Silver or the Sanguine, could only helplessly retract the world's gaze. After a few seconds, Catlia said, "I need a drop of blood from a mythical creature, regardless of the kind." In the palace held up by stone columns, silence suddenly became the main symphony. Even the world didn't know the exact concept of what a mythical creature was. Klein didn't expose this point as he planned on inquiring about it to the people he could ask in the future. He controlled the world to remain silent for a few seconds before saying, "I'll keep an eye out." As this was a rare request from Ma'am Hermit, Justice and Company also gave similar responses. All right. Catlia wasn't surprised by this outcome. The only reason why she made the request was to express her attitude of being integrated with the Tarot Club to Mr. Fool. She believed that this was better than trembling and being apprehensive at eliminating the aftereffects of what had happened. After a brief pause, Derek was about to say something when Emlyn spoke out ahead of him. The Sanguine Baron chuckled. "The requests for our row is clear. He wants the Sun Sequence 6 Notary's potion formula, and Mr. Hanged Man wishes to obtain the Ocean Songsters." Upon hearing this, Klein suddenly felt a little guilt-ridden. When he first obtained Creeping Hunger, he had wished to quickly release the Priest of Light in it, and obtaining the Sequence 6 and 5 potion formulas of the Sun Pathway, so as to sell it to Little Sunday. Yet, he hadn't completed it all this while. "I'll walk around Toscarter's Pier tonight. I'll find a pirate with beyonder powers who deserves to die or some gang leader to settle this emergency, regardless of which sequence they are. Or, I can directly release the Priest of Light." Klein made the world deliberate before saying, "I'll provide you with the notary potion formula in 3 days." Upon saying this, he looked at Little Sunday, "You can consider what item you wish to exchange for it." "All right, Mr. World," Derek replied in glee. As for the Ocean Songster potion formula which the Hanged Man needed, everyone didn't have any clues. Emlyn cleared his throat and said, "My request is different from the last one. I hope that you can help me find the believers of the Primordial Moon. Every effective clue will be rewarded with £100. A direct confirmation will be £500. He looked at Mr. Fool to make a request and, after obtaining his approval, he conjured 5 things that resembled bounty notices. Each person received a set of the 5 bounties. He and Derek didn't have one. Klein controlled the world to pick it up and casually browsed through it. Gallus Kevin, Dandy, Lara, Windsor Bearing, Argos. They aren't weak at all. At the very least, they're equivalent to recently born vampires, he silently muttered to himself as he memorized the corresponding information. After completing this matter, Emlyn felt more confident about winning the competition. He leaned back casually and waited for the other members to issue requests. This time, no one spoke again. Upon seeing this, the Fool Klein chuckled. "Continue your free exchange." Instantly, Audrey, Alger, Catlia, and company cast their eyes at Derek. They remembered that the Sun had previously mentioned that he would have arrangements to join an exploration mission that involved the periphery of the Giant King's court.